The night the sky turned red, no one in Tel Aviv or Tehran believed it would be the beginning of something that would change history. For years, threats had moved like shadows across headlines. Speeches were delivered. Warnings were issued. Sanctions were imposed. Yet life continued in cafes and markets and schools. People argued about politics but still went home for dinner. Then the sirens began. It started with a tremor in the early hours before dawn. In Tehran, the air defense systems roared awake. Radar screens flickered. Officers shouted coordinates. Far above the desert horizon, streaks of light cut through the darkness. Missiles crossed the sky like burning spears. Within minutes, explosions echoed across military installations on the outskirts of the city. Windows shattered. Car alarms screamed. Families rushed to basements, not yet knowing who had struck first. In Jerusalem, the cabinet gathered in an underground chamber built for moments like this. The prime minister stood silent while intelligence officers reported damage assessments. The operation had been prepared for months under strict secrecy. It was meant to cripple strategic sites and delay what they believed was an existential threat. Yet no one in the room mistook this for a clean surgical strike. They all knew retaliation would come. By sunrise, the world had awakened to chaos. News networks showed plumes of smoke rising from Iranian facilities. Social media flooded with shaky videos filmed from rooftops. In Tehran, people lined up at gas stations fearing shortages. Mothers held their children close while fathers tried to sound brave. On state television, leaders vowed that aggression would not go unanswered. Across the region, tension spread like wildfire. The response came faster than many analysts predicted. Ballistic missiles launched from deep within Iranian territory arced toward Israeli cities. Air raid sirens wailed through Haifa and Tel Aviv. The Iron Dome batteries fired interceptors into the sky, leaving white trails against the blue morning light. Some missiles were destroyed in mid-air, bursting into fragments that rained into the sea. Others slipped through. One struck near a residential block, turning concrete into dust and glass into shards. Hospitals filled quickly. Doctors worked without pause, treating burns and fractures in shock. Volunteers donated blood. Strangers carried strangers from rubble. Amid the devastation, there were moments of quiet humanity. A firefighter cradled a frightened child and whispered that everything would be all right even as smoke rose behind him. War had arrived not as an abstract concept but as a force that entered homes and rearranged lives forever. In Tehran, Brigadier General Reza Farhadi stood before a map illuminated by red and green markers. He had served for 3 decades and had seen skirmishes and covert clashes, but nothing like this. He knew escalation was a ladder with no visible top. Advisors urged decisive action. Younger officers demanded harsher retaliation. Yet Farhadi hesitated. He understood that pride and grief were powerful fuels, yet they could burn entire nations. Across the Mediterranean, fleets repositioned. Fighter jets refueled mid-air. Cyber units targeted infrastructure. Electricity grids flickered in several cities as hackers on both sides probed vulnerabilities. Airports closed. International flights diverted. Oil prices surged within hours, affecting markets from Asia to Europe. The conflict was no longer regional. It rippled outward, touching economies and politics far beyond the battlefield. Among civilians, fear mixed with defiance. In Tel Aviv, University student Yoel Levi volunteered at a shelter organizing food and blankets for displaced families. She had grown up under the constant awareness of threat, yet had never imagined missiles landing this close. She texted her brother, who served near the northern border, but received no reply. Each passing hour without news felt heavier than the last. In Tehran, medical intern Amir Hosseini worked a double shift at a hospital, overwhelmed with casualties from a targeted air base nearby. Many of the injured were young conscripts barely older than himself. As he stitched wounds and monitored heartbeats, he wondered how political decisions made in distant rooms translated into the blood on his gloves. He believed in defending his homeland, yet he feared the cost. Days turned into a relentless cycle of attack and counterattack. Precision strikes targeted command centers. Drones buzzed over contested zones. Naval skirmishes fled in the Red Sea, where shipping lanes became tense corridors guarded by warships. Each side claimed strategic victories. Each side broadcast images of resilience. Yet beneath official narratives, exhaustion spread through soldiers and civilians alike. Diplomats scrambled behind closed doors. Emergency sessions convened at the United Nations. World leaders urged restraint while carefully balancing alliances. Back-channel communications attempted to draw invisible lines that neither side should cross. There was talk of ceasefire frameworks and humanitarian corridors. But trust was scarce. Every explosion hardened attitudes. Every funeral strengthened resolve. One evening, a missile struck dangerously close to a cultural heritage site in Jerusalem, sparking global outrage. Hours later, a retaliatory strike damaged a historic district in Tehran, igniting equal fury. The destruction of history itself felt symbolic, as if the past was being shattered along with the present. Scholars and clerics pleaded publicly for protection of sacred spaces. For a brief moment, both governments paused targeting such locations, but the larger conflict continued. General Farhadi faced mounting pressure to expand operations beyond conventional limits. Some commanders proposed attacks on foreign bases allied with Israel. Others warned that widening the war could trigger an uncontrollable cascade. In Jerusalem, similar debates unfolded. The cabinet weighed the possibility of deeper incursions. Intelligence estimates varied wildly. No one could predict where escalation might end. Meanwhile, ordinary life shrank to essentials. Schools closed. Public gatherings were banned. Weddings were postponed. In shelters, children drew pictures of peace signs and doves while outside artillery thundered. In both countries, religious leaders delivered sermons calling for strength, yet also for mercy. Even in war, faith sought to preserve a fragment of humanity. The turning point came unexpectedly through tragedy. A miscalculated strike hit a convoy evacuating civilians near a contested border zone. Dozens were killed, including women and children from both sides who had been caught in crossfire while attempting to flee. Graphic images spread rapidly across the globe. Protests erupted not only internationally, but within Iran and Israel. Citizens demanded accountability and an end to the spiral. Yoel joined thousands gathering in a dimly lit square holding candles instead of flags. She felt anger yet also sorrow for families on the other side whom she would never meet. In Tehran, Ami watched a similar vigil unfold through a hospital window where staff and patients stood together in silence. The shared grief created a rare mirror across enemy lines. International mediators seized the moment. Emergency talks accelerated. A proposal emerged outlining phased escalation monitored by neutral observers. It required painful concessions. It demanded public acknowledgement of loss without triumph. Hardliners in both governments resisted fiercely. Yet military commanders privately admitted resources were strained and morale fragile. Continuing indefinitely would risk catastrophe. After tense negotiations, a temporary ceasefire was announced. Sirens fell silent for the first time in weeks. Soldiers remained alert, but weapons cooled. Humanitarian aid flowed into damaged neighborhoods. Engineers assessed infrastructure. Families ventured cautiously into streets once filled with smoke. The silence felt strange, almost fragile, as if it might shatter at any sound. General Farhadi addressed his officers, emphasizing that strength was not only measured by firepower but by wisdom. In Jerusalem, the Prime Minister spoke to the nation, acknowledging both resilience and suffering. Neither leader declared victory. Instead, they framed the pause as a necessary step toward stability. Skepticism remained, yet relief was undeniable. In the months that followed, negotiations continued in distant capitals. The process was slow and imperfect. Trust rebuilt itself grain by grain. Prisoner exchanges occurred under heavy security. Economic discussions opened tentative channels of cooperation focused on preventing future crises. There were setbacks and heated rhetoric, but the memory of devastation tempered impulses. Yoel eventually reunited with her brother, who returned exhausted yet alive. Amir resumed his studies, determined to specialize in trauma care, hoping never again to witness such volumes of injury. Both carried invisible scars, yet also a deeper awareness of shared vulnerability. They had learned that wars are not fought only by governments but endured by generations. Years later, historians would debate who gained strategic advantage and who conceded more. Analysts would publish volumes dissecting military tactics and diplomatic maneuvers. But for those who had heard the first sirens, the conflict would always be remembered differently. It was the night the sky burned and people on both sides realized how close the abyss truly was. The horizon over the Mediterranean eventually returned to its familiar blue. Markets reopened. Children played in parks rebuilt from rubble. Yet every so often, when a jet crossed overhead or thunder rolled in the distance, hearts skipped a beat. Memory lingered like an echo. And in that echo remained a quiet hope that the lesson of fire would not be forgotten.